Hey, welcome to. I'm speaking now. All right, let's start over. Hey, Frank here with Youthman, and I have some pals here. Got Brian Lucas, Ben Reed, and Keith Parker, and we are gonna come at you with roundtable number 27, the original OG Youthman Roundtable, the best in the block. And so we're gonna talk about some youth ministry stuff, and today we're gonna talk about specifically how to be more outward focused within our youth ministry. And so we have some good questions lined up. As always, if you have questions, feel free to hit us up on Facebook, on Twitter, in the Q&A over here, or like text message Ben. Like I'm sure he'll check his phone. So you text him and you can ask us questions, and we'll get them answered in here. So with that being said, Ben, ask us our first question.
I want to ask, how do people have my cell phone number to text me?
I don't. People know your number. I'm gonna put it in the Facebook group right now.
That'd be the worst. All right. So Keith is sort of coming up with this topic. Keith, I think we both came up with the first question when we were preparing these out. What does it mean for a youth group to be outwardly focused? Like, what does that look like in youth ministry?
Yeah, I think as I thought about the question, sometimes we get so focused on discipling the students that we've got and trying to get students to come to events and come to programs and come to activities and stuff that we sometimes forget that the call of the church is to go and make disciples of all nations. And so I think just kind of how do we promote the idea that God is bigger than the four walls of our church? How do we promote the idea that God is at work in the lives of the people around us? And how do we get students to stop just thinking about the consumerism of what is the church providing for me and look outside and see how they can serve others? That's kind of the thought I had.
Yeah. I guess I'd ask sort of follow-up for that. I don't think these two guys are going to have anything different really to say in terms of what, but what are some characteristics, I guess, of an outward-focused youth ministry? And that's for everybody.
Yeah, I'll go first. I mean, I think I haven't seen many youth groups that aren't naturally inward focused. So I'm not saying that well, I guess what I'm saying is I don't see many youth groups that naturally yes, we're automatically outward focused. I'm sure they exist out there. I think the constant pressure for the youth pastor is to kind of create a culture where it is outward focused and where there is encouraging others to seek out, to be inviting. Because I know in every youth group I've been in and I've been around, it's always trying to tell the kids, hey, be more welcoming to the new guests. Hey, let's figure out ways to be more welcoming to people in our community, in our neighborhood. And so it's difficult for us to I don't think naturally be outward focused. But I think signs of a youth group that is more outward focused is a sign where when new guests come in, they feel welcomed. And that could mean several different things, whether it means the actual students are very welcoming, or you create an environment where you have leadership that knows how to integrate and welcome new people in. And I think both are valid. Obviously, if both are doing it well, then that's the perfect youth group. But I think creating an environment where new people are welcomed is an aspect of an outward facing youth group. And I guess another way, that's kind of a subtle way, is when outside of your church and outside of other churches, your youth group is known. Does that make sense? So when the principal of the school knows the youth pastor, that's a sign of an outward focused youth group. When the community knows you, that means something. And I think that goes to more stuff like if your youth group was called 180, then will they know what 180 means? Or do you have to always kind of explain what 180 means? And if you have a youth group named 180 and they know what that means, then that's a sign that you're an outward-focused youth group. But I think there's other youth groups like high school ministry over in California and stuff like that where they know not just the name of the church, but they know the youth group because they are outward-focused in what they do.
Yeah, that's good. Who else has a thought?
On signs of outward-focused youth ministry, I think it comes through in everything that we do. If you it's not just like, oh, we do outreach or oh, we do this. I think top to bottom, everything's got to be considering people that may or may not be attending your group or regulars at your group. And so like in the way that you teach, if you're always teaching toward, like, hey, so to follow up on everything I said last week, and if you weren't here for the last month straight, none of this will make sense. And, like if you're the people that come in, if everybody's buddy and you're totally out of the loop when they walk in the door and your whole group's clicked up, then, I think the way that everything is arranged, being outward focus shows in the way that you from the door through the whole service, the way you handle worship, the way your worship leaders introduce it, the way you introduce yourself when you teach, all of that will display that you're an outward focused ministry in the way of that. So I think you could look at any one piece of your ministry and go, is that welcoming to new people or is that not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think I'd probably answer the question with the opposite answer, which is I know what the signs are of an inward-focused youth group. That like they never experience growth. They're unwelcoming to new people. They're not active in their community. They're not living out their faith in their schools. They're showing up at church expecting to be fed instead of expecting to serve and be a part of what's happening. Like those would be bad signs to me that something needs to change.
Yeah.
And a lot of times that's a leadership down, I think. How do we infect them with that culture?
I would say, though, to follow up that point, that what you said of like the opposite answer, that the signs of an inward focus, and that sort of points to an outward, but those signs, just because they're not there, doesn't mean it's an outward focused youth group. Like there's a youth group that I'm thinking of from a place that I've served at previously that we were close by to, that they had a lot of new people coming. They had a lot of students that were so served. They had all those sort of not signs of inward, but I would still say they were very inward focused, where it was still all about their ministry, still so much about building up their leader, that it wasn't outward focused on actually making disciples for Jesus Christ. It was more like, hey, let's build a movement for this ministry. And it was still so inwardly focused, even though they lacked those signs that you just talked about, Keith. They were not an outward focused youth ministry.
Yeah.
And so I think for me that's just number one sort of key of having an outward focused youth ministry, focused on saying like every student meets Christ, is discipled by Christ, and doing what's necessary for that. But that's tough to sort of quantify, I suppose. And so with that definition, every youth pastor could say, oh, I totally got an outward focused youth ministry. So, excuse me, one of the questions we were going to talk about was sort of just that idea that most youth ministries, I think, Frank, you said it towards the beginning, that it's natural for youth groups to become inward focused without really realizing it, without like being intentional about that. And I think when you said that, someone I'd already been thinking about even small groups, that so many youth ministries, especially the last 5 years or whatever, have really adapted to that small group model and made small groups like the focus. Yeah. And I think small groups are about as inclusive as you can get, and that's a good thing. Like, we want small groups to be inclusive. So how do you sort of, if you're going to be an outward-focused youth ministry, what role does small groups play in that? And how can your small group leaders help drag you into an outward-focused ministry?
I think there's two ways to look at it. I think in one sense, you can keep small groups inclusive to make it like that next step in that person's walk. So like the main service is the open arms where people gather, and the people who are not a part of the ministry from, I guess, the outside, if you will, can come into that space, and then when they want to take that next step of growth, then they go into small groups. But then you hear about these stories of these youth groups who say, we have more people coming to our small groups than our main service. I'm always like, that's bananas. That seems like the craziest thing for me, especially because a lot more of my models have been small groups is that next step where if you want to grow in your faith, you go there, and that number is always significantly smaller. Not significantly, like 60%, 70% of the total coming to your main service. But I think what they do is, in those small groups, one, they make it an environment where if a new person comes in, like Keith said, they're not asking, so wait, I have to be there on Wednesday to know what we're talking about? And so, like, if you have a small group that's based on answering questions from the Wednesday night service, you got to make sure those questions are still open enough where if someone missed the Wednesday night service or the Sunday evening service or whatever, they can still participate. And I think small groups can sometimes be more of a welcoming place for people who are outside the ministry than sometimes even the Wednesday night or your main worship service, because it's a smaller gathering. They're closer to the person who invited them, and they get more of that one-on-one attention, where some of our ministries, if you have upwards to 50, 60, 100 kids in your youth group, they could be just another face in the crowd. That can be kind of hard to keep up with, where in small groups, it could be a great opportunity to be outward focused in the sense of that. The other thing I know is you could use small groups as the means to reach the community. So as opposed to like having a youth-wide event where like our youth group is going to do this, you have small groups choosing different projects to be those hands and feet into the community, to be more outward focused, whether it is like tutoring kids, elementary kids, or going to Boys and Girls Clubs. Like the small group does that, and that could be probably even more of a powerful tool, because you have a more concise mentality on reaching those kids and reaching those people and be more outward focused. So I think both camps are valid, though. I don't want to say to diss those who are like, yeah, small groups are only for those church kids or those kids who want to do accept. I think there's a valid place for that. But I think there's also another side where we've seen, like I've heard of youth groups where the main youth group is like 75 kids, but with small groups, the total number of small group kids is like 100. And I don't know how that worked out, but that's an awesome blessing. It's
Youth
sweet.
pastor math.
Youth pastor math. That's true.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. We actually have that.
Wow.
We have to an extent, and yeah, part of it is youth pastor math. It's kind of on how you count the numbers. But honestly, we have some students who we have connections with, because I think we're a pretty outward focused youth ministry, and because we have connections from things like being involved at FCA at the high schools, and getting in touch with the Youth Pastor Network locally, starting one locally, and doing events like that, speaking at our actually this week I get to speak at the chapel for our local Christian high school, and by doing things with youth that aren't part of our youth group, then we end up with stuff where, well, hey, this girl goes to the church down the street, but 3 of her friends are in this youth group that meets at Starbucks before school.
Yeah.
And she's available to show up and be part of that small group. And so do we tell this girl, no, you can't be part of our Bible study because you go to a different church, so we're going to shun you? Or do we say, hey, you want to come and contribute your voice in a totally different perspective from teaching that you're receiving on a weekly basis that is, still about Jesus, but totally different from ours. And so, it adds a lot of, in some of those groups, it works really well. And we've got several students attending who aren't part of our, or don't actually attend our youth ministry, but are part of our small groups. But we kind of have to cheat to say we have more kids in small groups than in our youth ministry, because we do small groups during our regular high school service. So we have small groups there, and then we have also off-campus small groups that meet throughout the week. And so a lot of students are in technically 2 groups, and then also we have kids that attend those off-campus groups that don't come to our youth. So
yeah,
Heater, you're the worst.
I know.
We actually set up our small groups, our life groups, we call them, as the open door into our ministry. So for us, small groups are not the let's go deeper and like try to really delve into this. That's Sunday school for us.
Cool.
So for us, small groups is in our discipleship strategy, connect, worship, grow, serve. Small groups is the connect event. And so we bill it that way. We meet in people's homes. It's very comfortable. We serve a meal, and it's like sitting on couches and chairs and talking about the Bible on a very lower level. It's not super intense. It's not a college Bible course.
Mm-hmm.
and we bill it to our students that this is the place to bring your friends. This is where they come into our youth ministry. And so, I mean, we're kind of in the same boat as Brian in some ways. Like we had 53 students at our Wednesday night program this past week, and we had 66 students in life groups. So that's kind of the funneling process for us, and that's just the way we set it up. So, for us, that's that opportunity for a student to, and I think that's one way to build a culture, just to kind of throw that in there, to build a culture of an outward focused youth group, is that you're constantly reminding students to look outward. That you're constantly saying, like, this is why we do this. This is where you bring your friends. Bring your friends with you. This is part of the process of discipling somebody else, and bring them alongside. And like, I can't tell you how many times I say that every week, just as a reminder to students, like, this is not the holy huddle. It's a chance for you to begin discipling somebody else. So.
Yeah, I think we could have a whole other conversation about how we have our small group set up, because I think Brian, Keith, and me, we all have different uses of our small groups. Of, like, for us, Sunday school is actually, we were going to make it our big, our growth time, but then we just noticed we had so many more visitors on Sunday mornings that were coming to Sunday school than others, so that's sort of an open door for us. So we're doing more lax, but at the same time, yeah, we'll talk about small groups some other time before I get too into that. The sort of follow-up question to that I was going to ask, and then I'll give my answer first, is with small groups, how do you use your small group leaders? How do you train them to be that outward focused? What do you do to get all of your leaders to help create that outward focused youth ministry? For us, going back to sort of how we have our small group set up, that there's still a bit of an open door for us. We still do deep conversations, deep study, but it's also ours are on the same night as youth ministry, so 180 is both sermon and small group, so that if you come to 180, you're in a small group right away, just because we know getting them in a small group, seeing that we do go deep, seeing that we take this seriously, and is it just, hey, Pastor Ben read a poop joke, what'd you think of that? That we want to show students, like, hey, this is unlike anything you have in your life, and then that leader contacting them during the week, saying, like, hey, I know your name, and I care about you, and I hope we'll see you again. So it's both our open door as well as deep growth. So our small group leaders are really trained in sort of that first wave of getting people in, but also we do several service projects. If you download the handy dandy fall calendar, you'll see we have a service project every month, and the one in October that's sort of not on the calendar is all small group led, just sort of starting that out. Or small group leaders and their students are finding who to go do a service project for in our church. So trying to do those things. Who else has thoughts on how you use small group leaders to be outward focused? Man, I like to say, Brian, me and you, we sound so monotone sometimes. Like, honestly, right now, I'm about to fall asleep. And it's not because of anything you guys are saying or this is being boring, but I'm exhausted. And so I'm just noticing Brian's voice and then my voice were so monotone. It's just blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm making myself
I'm just trying to keep my voice deep and low so it's good. No. But for our...
I'll try to keep mine deep and low so I don't bother the admins outside.
I think since for us a lot of our deeper discipleship is happening in small groups, the way that we get our leaders involved in having an outward focused is by having them catch that vision of, like, we want this youth minute, we want our church to be a place where people come and meet Jesus and all of that, and that they need that, and we want that need to be present in them. And so as we're talking about being a small group leader, it's not just about hyper equipping the sheep to be super epic sheep, but to make to be able to be training their students in what it really means to be a Christian, which is largely going out and making disciples. That it's our job, not the pastor's job, not just the one paid leader or a couple of the adults or whatever. it's every Christian's job to be fulfilling the Great Commission. And so as that is part of what we're regularly kind of sharing with the leaders and sharing through our small groups, I think that becomes kind of that, a place where they're figuring out, how am I living in a way that's inviting others into the kingdom and displaying a life that is that whether my circumstances are good or not, my hope and my love and compassion for those around me is such that it's drawing people into this to want to know how they too can have a relationship with Christ. And if that's our focus of our groups, if that's the way we're trying to build them and lead them, then, and that's all through our leaders. So as we're training them, if that's what they're pouring into their small groups, then our small groups become not necessarily the place where people are brought in, but the place where our students are sent out from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was good.
I think Frank's asleep now.
Yeah. I think the key to what you're saying is everybody needs great leaders. And I pity the guy who's at a church struggling to find even 2 or 3 just high capacity, high quality leaders that can come alongside him and help out. Because, I'm so blessed here with just people that I trust that have been involved with youth ministry for a long time, that their heart is so clear. And, a part of it is, I think, as a leader, you're communicating the vision to those leaders what the general overall ministry looks like. So my leaders all know Connect, Worship, Grow, Serve. They know life groups is our Connect event. So that builds, it sets the tone from the start. And so then they go to their life group that I'm not involved with. I'm hosting my own life group at my house, and they're hosting one at their house. But they're saying things like, man, bring your friends next week. Hey, we're going to do this. Don't miss out on this opportunity to invite a friend. And, I think I don't know a better way to say it than just saying it's creating a culture where you're looking outward instead of just, man, let's huddle up and talk about the Bible, and let's do it in such a way that we're only using words like sanctification and repentance that nobody else knows what we're talking about. I just think it's a culture thing, and it takes time to develop, and sometimes you gotta readjust and shoot people back on track with that. But once the culture gets there, then the rest of it's pretty natural, I think.
Yeah. I'd say that's part of our, with our roots groups, we call our groups roots groups that meet off campus. With them meeting not just off campus in someone's house, but ours meet mostly in coffee shops, and then 2 of them meet at McDonald's. And by being out in the community, I think that also helps you stay outward focused, especially when we meet at a Starbucks that's adjacent to our high school's field, and so all of the students go there, and there are roots groups there 4 days a week. And so almost any day of the week, students can go in before school and get coffee and turn around and see 8 of their classmates having a Bible study and be like, what is this about? And so it starts those conversations. It gets our students in a place where they kind of have to end up sharing about what it is that they're, what their faith's about and everything, because they're out in the community doing, studying and learning, and not just keeping it closed in and private. So.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Cool stuff. I think we're coming up on a half hour or so here soon, so we could keep talking about this for a while, but I'm going to try and start wrapping it up, as well as don't have a topic for next week, but Frank won't be here next Monday in the group because he's going to be driving up to Milwaukee. Personally, I'm pretty excited that Frank and I are going to be about an hour apart to be doing ministry together. I'm already thinking I might talk to Frank about coming up and doing a social media night, but I guess coming down. Even though I think I know more about social media than you do. Just throwing that out there.
But I have influx in my voice when I talk.
Yeah, and I just talk like this. Facebook, Snapchat, Tumblr. Deal with it.
It's gonna be fun. Expect more cool videos where we're in the same room, which will be fun.
Yeah, and just leaving Brian and Keith to do their own videos across the country. Yeah, new products up in the store. Shameless promotion. Fall calendar. It's like that on the inside. It's like that on the back. Water bottle. Yeah, it's made for Glory Art. I love it. It's straight from Newspring. They gave it out for free, and so I just love an intro video they did. We're not doing their sermons, but totally stole their art. So check that out. It's great stuff. All right. You guys all have a good week. Mark Beasley, I'm not answering those questions because I know you're just joking. I will say, I guess, real quick, because this is a sometimes serious question, and in relation to today's topic, I have no leaders. How do you recruit leaders? I'd say if you have no leaders, then that's more of an influx also of your church not being outward focused. That if there's not enough people inside your church who are thinking of others as much as themselves, they're not going to lead. And so that's something that you're going to have to battle against in your church to help create that more outward focused. And obviously not as a rogue jerk going up on Sunday mornings, grabbing the mic from the pastor and cursing everybody out, dropping it. But yeah, that's more indicative, I think, of a problem that's church-wide than just youth ministry-wide. So I would say that. Because if you've got an outward-focused youth ministry, adults are going to be coming. So, all right.
Can I throw a comment in on that?
Yes, I'll allow
it. On recruiting people, I think it's easy to get caught up in an idea of what your youth group should look like based on what you've seen somewhere else or what you've experienced previously, and to have an idea of like, man, I need this person, I need all the young 20-somethings to come volunteer with me and all that. And I think the best place to start, like you said, being outward focused, but getting out of your office or out of your youth group and around, getting to know people in the church, finding the people who have the heart for students, and not being judgmental about what they look like on the outside, but about what their heart is, and if they're authentically, good, solid Christian people who want to serve by blessing students, then I think at that point you open yourself up to finding the right people and a lot of prayer. Sustainable Youth Ministry has some, or not Sustainable Youth Ministry, sorry, Contemplative Youth Ministry by Yaconelli has some really interesting perspectives on how to recruit leaders and how to run your ministry in a way that opens it up to leaders that may seem really unconventional and might open up some avenues that some of the people who are struggling with that have not explored, or if you're struggling recruiting leaders, I think that might be a good resource. So.
Yeah. Keith, I know you had a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say a lot of the conversation just naturally has gone to students coming to us and how to kind of outwardly focus our students to go get their friends, but I think a part of this has to be us going to them as well. Being involved, going to the school. Somebody said earlier about if the principal knows the youth minister, that's a good sign. That's a positive thing. Things like coaching a team, being involved with FCA, being in the community, just being around is just a huge thing. And I think if you're a youth minister and you've been there for a couple of years and you don't know any of the other youth ministers in your city, like, that's not cool. Like, you need to get connected and recognize that God's doing cool stuff in other churches within 5, 10, 15, 20 miles of you, and that you might be able to learn something and glean something from other people. So I think those are all good thoughts that get us out of just the office, out of just our four walls of our church, thinking outward. Well,
mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's it for this week. Have a great week, and if you're launching this week, well, probably no one's launching this week if they're on Sundays to the Labor Day, but won't be here next week because I forgot it's Labor Day. We're going to take that day off. We're also, if you're in our Facebook group, we are starting something new on holidays such as Labor Day where we should be taking Sabbaths. And we are going to be disabling new comments or threads. So if you feel like you really want to complain about khaki pants, there's several other youth pastor networks that'll probably still be open. All right. Everyone have a great week. Love you all. That was just a joke. All right.